In 1942, Franklin Roosevelt ordered the executive order for Japanese internment camps, which was considered one of the most controversial and darkest times in American history. In the modern era, instead of it being the Japanese, there is still this type of prejudice around. Instead of the Japanese, it is focused primarily on Muslims. The presidential candidate, Donald Trump, wants to ban Muslims from the United States by showing that A, the outside countries do not want this, B, the American people do not want this, and C, that banning Muslims will be going against the values of this country. I intend to prove that Trump's Muslim immigration ban is undesirable in both the US and the outside world. Firstly, the outside countries will see us in a negative light which could harm our relationship with these said countries. In the Washington Post made an article that said the Egyptian official government called this policy, quote, a hate rhetoric and could jeopardize the refugee resettlement process. If this ban was to go through, then this could harm our delicate relationship with Egypt. On top of that, the British Parliament reacted to a petition by the British people which asked for a ban on Donald Trump because of policies like this, because of this policies and policies similar to this. The English Parliament has not officially had a result from this hearing, but if this proposition is enough to get the British Parliament to debate on banning Donald Trump, if this was to actually go into law, then how much harm would it give, or how much harm would it do to our relationship to Great Britain, which is one of our closest allies? And then, on top of that, Obama, who has been our president for 8 years and knows about dealing with foreign countries, has also stated in his State of the Union address that it would diminish us in the eyes of the world. It makes us harder to achieve our goals, as well as it betrays who we are as a country. With this, I state my claim that the outside countries would see us in a negative light if we were to pass these policies, and that it could harm our relationship with said policies. Secondly, both political parties, Republican and Democrats, have gone against Trump's policies. In an article by MSNBC, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton had both gone against his policy from the Democratic side. These Democratic candidates, who are supposed to be leaders of their party and speak for the Democratic people, have said, quote, from Sanders, we should ignore those ignorant candidates who divide us by race or where they come from. Clinton has said we must work more closely with Muslim American communities. On the other side of the spectrum, Republicans, who is Donald Trump's own political party, and people who speak for the Republicans have said, from Marco Rubio, I disagree with Donald Trump's latest proposal. His habit of making offensive and outlandish statements will not bring Americans together. While John Cash, governor of Ohio, said this is more of the outrageous divisiveness that characterizes his every breath and another reason why he is entirely unsuited to lead the United States. These statements from both major political party leaders who speak for the candidates show that it is not wanted by a majority of the American people. Lastly, keeping out people is not what America is about and could lead to decline in American principles and values, as well as the identity of America itself as the leader of the free world. In a poll by CBS News, most Americans said that it would go against the founding principles of this country, and that a poll states that nearly 6 out of 10 Americans said that the U.S. should not ban Muslims, while 2/3 of the poll said that a ban on Muslims would go against the founding principles of this country. This statistic shows that it is undesirable to a majority of Americans, while in the same article, CBS News did a research and said that George Washington himself once said, if they are good workmen, they may be of Asia, Africa, or Europe. They may be Mesopotamian, Muslims, Jews, Christians, or of any sect. This shows that while George Washington, the father of our country, specifically stated that it will allow anyone into their country, and if we were to impose this ban, it would go against the values that they created, thus harming our identity as America and leader of the free world. By proving that the outside countries do not want this policy and would affect our relationship with said countries, the fact that both Republicans and Democrats have gone against this policy, and the fact that keeping out America or keeping out Muslims would damage our identity as America, I display that Donald Trump's policy on Muslims is unwanted. Thank you very much.
All right, well, the proposition ends up coming after the preview of the supporting points, so that was a little bit confusing, but I can see how you're building up to a particular point. It's like doing a multiplication problem. Here are all of the integers that we're dealing with, and then here's the result. I can kind of see the way you're building it there. I do think it's a little more confusing than you want it to be, but the proposition was clearly identified, and there is, like I said, a preview of what you're talking about, and you focus on Trump's plan. I do think that you need to be a little bit more specific in describing what Trump's policy is. I'm not exactly sure that it's a straight ban on the allowing Muslims in. I think that there's some caveats and restrictions in it, but I know that that's the part that gets quoted. Is that in fact what the policy calls for? I think that needs to be clarified a little bit. The signposting of the secondary structure is very clear. It's easy to follow the argument. The labels are okay, although sometimes there's a little bit of ambiguity. I think the third point especially needs to be phrased a little in a bit more certain way so that it's less confusing. And then as an example of the confusion, at the very end of the speech, you kind of shift your proposition from being undesirable or harmful, which you kind of suggested at the beginning of the speech, to being unwanted. So is the argument about whether or not people want it or whether or not it's going to have a negative consequence? I think that you want to stick with the negative consequence. I think that's a little bit more focused on what you were talking about. Examples and statistics are okay. Most of your statistics are opinion poll data, and that's useful for value arguments, which I think the third point is close to being the way you phrased it. You of course also cite the candidates, the public officials, and their objection to this. I thought that the first point was actually nicely developed with your example of the British Parliament, with the problems with Egypt coming up, and the testimony of the President on that particular point. I thought the way those built together, that was a really strong argument on that particular point. The second point is a little bit more ambiguous because it's focusing on what the parties think as opposed to a more general statement. I know that you're using that to show that generally the public opposes this as well. The presentation issues, you are very emphatic in when you're speaking. It's like you're punctuating things and hitting it with a little bit of vocal inflection here and there, and that helps keep us alert and involved and engaged, but you don't want to overdo it too much because you might irritate people. Like I see a couple people right now are still cleaning out their ears. All right, thank you.